prayer for all beings. May we each as individuals find the solutions to our own respective challenges and difficulties within life. May we as families, friends, strangers, enemies, and communities better see how all these solutions are interconnected and rely upon each other. May we as a universe learn how to better live with each other through these solutions. And may our example teach these solutions well to our children to better solve the challenges and difficulties of the next 7 generations and beyond. Together, through compassion and love, may we alleviate dukkha and perform tikkun olam. Aho. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Amen. Big up! Liberation Movement. Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom, Mir, Ni hao, Buenos dias, Buenos noches, Here's Aquado, Document. What up, though? This is Convo with TzuriJi. I am TzuriJi, aka Peter Johansson Osisi. And they say the end is the beginning. It's a little bit early for Simchat Torah, but this is the conclusion as well as the introduction. Right. This is the summation of the series or the season or the sequence of the podcast at this moment. We've been at this for over half a year thereabouts, and a lot has changed since this joint began. Life has changed in very significant ways. And life is continuing to change and unfold. So it's interesting to see, to observe that process, that sequence through the sharing of these podcasts. Albeit, probably half of these podcasts are from years ago, but even just the commentary that I share. Anyways, this joint today is the conclusion of the series, or the sequence, or the season. I mentioned previously the prospect of doing an additional sequence, series, or season with increased availability. At the moment, we're working on other priorities, but also with a different format, different approach towards Convo. So that's a ... at the moment. So this is summing up the joint for the past half year or so. And the Convo is with yours truly, because it is the original introduction to this podcast. I mentioned before that when I prepared the basics, the foundation of this podcast this past half year ago, I recorded an introduction as a beginning kind of episode. And the original recording was way long, as you might be able to see in the duration of this joint. It's like over 2 hours, if I recall correctly, something like that. So I was like, yo, that's way too long to start a joint off with. So I recorded again. However, like, yo, I just talked for 2 hours. I ain't throwing this away. So I mentioned the prospect of sharing it at some other time. Guess what? This is that some other time. So this is the original introduction to the podcast, and how apropos as the concluding joint, a reflection, perhaps a gauge, a measurement to see how effective or otherwise this joint has been for the past half year, and again, something to build from, something to grow on, and continuing the conversation into the next sequence, series, season, something like that. So that's what this is. Here it is. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Ni hao, buenos dias, heseche, aquaba, welcome. What up, though? This is Convo with TzuriJi. My name is TzuriJi, aka Peter Johansson Osisi. And this is a podcast on mélanger wisdom and righteousness. Mélanger is a word that comes from français. It means mixed, of mixed heritage. Well, it effectively means mixed, but we apply it in this context to signify being of mixed heritage. And that can be mixed heritage by blood and or mixed heritage by bond. By blood meaning one's ancestry comes from many different lands. By bond means that one identifies with cultures, with peoples from many different lands in a very significant, committed manner. In the experience of mélanger, we include the entirety of Earth because in being mélanger, we recognize that there are no lines. Excuse me. There are lines, but there are no borders. How about that? So there are lines that distinguish us, but there's an absence of any border that absolutely separates us. We are a single collective of Earth. That's how we identify. That's how we are aligned. That's our allegiance. That's how it is. So this is a podcast that shares the experience of wisdom and righteousness in that experience of being mélanger. From that experience of being mélanger. This is a series of convos with brethren from different parts of the earth, with different walks of life, from different backgrounds and experiences, of different creeds and ethnicities, and additionally. And it ain't always about being mixed. The combos are about the topics of interest of the brethren who are in the convo for that session. And because of the aggregate of these combos, because of the context or the vibe, the atmosphere, the connection through these combos, there's the conveyance of the mélanger experience. So that'll be increasingly evident through the sharing. The format of these combos is generally between 30 a 60, 30 to 60 minutes, half an hour to an hour. It basically circles around a top 3 list, at least in these initial iterations. A top 3 list on different topics, again based upon the interest of the brother, sister, the uncle, the auntie, the niece, the nephew who's in the convo for that session. And before we get into the top 3 convo for that session, I share a description of how I meet the person that I'm talking with, and the topic that we're talking about, and then also inviting that person to talk about that person's ancestors, their ancestry, their heritage, how they get to where they are at that moment, at this moment. And then we get into the top 3 list, and then as kind of a wrap out, a wrap off, a send out, I invite the brethren to share a message for the 7th generation. That notion of the 7th generation, generation numero siete, comes from a number of different traditions, but particularly from native traditions of this land on the Western Hemisphere. I should add, we're coming from the Cuyahoga area of Ohio, by the big lakes of the Western Hemisphere. So that's the general format for the convos. And the style, the stilo that we working with.
is very basic, minimalist, simplistic, focusing on quote unquote the spirit of the conversation. So rather than doing edits and stuff like that, we just letting it run and sharing it accordingly. And it might be less pretty in the presentation, yet there's a certain continuity and authenticity in that approach. There's propensity for maybe doing some blanks or censoring or whatever if it need be, but other than that, the basic intention at this moment is just to keep it as it is. Now my skills are very modest. This is other than my forte. I spend the past number of decades, and I plan to get into who I am, what I'm about, this and the other in a minute. And the topic for this joint, in this introduction, I do have a top 3 list. It's the top. I have a list of 3 photographs. I'm actually video recording this as well, and so I have 3 photographs. So obviously in the audio format, it's like, yo, what? But I'm sharing this as the video joint, but also in the website link for this episode, I'm including the photographs as well. But the point is that in sharing the photographs, it's sharing portions of my life, and that's how I intend to describe who I am. But like I said, my skills in Convo are very modest, particularly in this podcast. This is my first try at it, and so we're going to have the product accordingly. So I'll give some background into like how the podcast develops, and then I'll get into the 3 photographs that I have for myself. So I've been doing actually recordings for over a decade, back before YouTube was YouTube, when it was Google Video and YouTube was actually YouTube, back in the days of current TV, when the internet was being invented by an inconvenient truth. That was a little bit rehearsed, but it's still there. So over a decade ago, about actually a decade and a half thereabouts. And based upon my experience in life at that moment and since that period, I have less concern about the presentation. My interest is in posterity, because a lot of what I share, many people have yet to be prepared for that. So I'm much of my approach in the past few decades has been for the consideration of the archives, and for those who are prepared for it and actually work with it and build with it. And there are casts that do that. So anyways, my point for saying that is that I've been less concerned about the presentation and like the numbers, and additionally, I've been increasingly concerned with the authenticity, the truth, the relevance, and how to optimally implement the lessons of this in our practice, in our day-to-day lives. And so I learned some things. And anyways, in terms of the podcast, I do this on YouTube video. I do this on Google Video, YouTube, for over a decade, and I do it like this, just talking, running my mouth, dolo style for the most part. Sometimes it's for 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Sometimes it's for 2 hours, and sometimes it's scripted. Sometimes it's just getting something out that needs to be got out. However, for these podcasts, my intention is to be increasingly concise and also conversational, because it can be increasingly easier to receive the ideas, the exchange, and conversation is a beautiful thing. But even in that, what I'm learning, I've already done a few episodes at this point already, and what I'm learning is that it's one thing to have a convo with people, and that's I have that through the years. I have fantastic combos, but in having a conversation in person, just privately, there's less concern about the audience, and additionally, that factor is less of an influence in the cognition and thinking, and so it's easier just to concentrate on what the other person is saying and just invest in that. So I have fantastic conversations through the years, and particularly within the recent months and a year, to the point where people say I should do a podcast, and I should do a podcast with these brethren, and that's what precipitates this. So I'm transitioning, and no, I should say straight up, I'll say like that. I am progressing from the YouTube format exclusively towards this format also, in the podcast, and the mechanics involved with that. But it takes some adjustment, and all right, I'll leave it at that. Additionally, I'm working from some notes, and in this approach, in this endeavor, in this project, there's also the inclusion of support for the past decade, because particularly I've been concerned about the numbers of the audience, and additionally having been concerned about monetizing, and additionally in this podcast there is the intention of including a support mechanism. However, doing it in a way that's somewhat distinct, actually fundamentally distinct from the conventional methodologies, while still utilizing conventional methodologies, and I explain why or how. Before I do that, actually, I'm going to say what Mélanger wisdom and righteousness is. I said what Mélanger is. I didn't say what wisdom and righteousness is. So the wisdom is the knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of the divine presence that exists within us, and that exists within all others as well. And being secure with that, being affirmed with that, being at peace with that, and with others, and with others being harmonious. So the way we strengthen that knowledge of self is by having a knowledge of our songs, the knowledge of our stories, and the knowledge of our rituals. This is what Confucius teaches us, and Socrates, and additionally. So that's the wisdom. And being Mélanger, these songs, stories, and rituals are those which come from all the earth, and a respect for those which come from all the earth. And emphasizing those that are directly from our ancestral lineage, and additionally, but that's the experience of Mélanger, is the aggregate of these, and that's one of the things that I do. I'm planning to get into that. That's the wisdom part. The righteousness is how we practice the lessons from that. The principles, the teachings, the ethics, the values that we glean from the stories and the songs and the rituals and the teachings of our ancestors and our prophets and our sages, how we practice that on a daily basis. That's the righteousness of it. So Mélanger, what wisdom and righteousness, that's what this is about. And in that sense, the principles, the ethics, is not just a philosophy. It's not just like, it would be nice if we did this. It's a matter of, we need to be, let's do this. This is how we have to do it. So in my walk, there is adherence to certain specific ethics. There's a fivefold ethics: honesty, sobriety, veganism, marital fidelity, and ethical economics, that I personally practice as part of my religion of earth, and also my ethnic heritage of earth. And particularly that fifth one, ethical economics, that involves making sure people who provide the food, who grow the food, who pick the food, who distribute the food, and everybody else who's involved in that process is provided with fair compensation. The term that's conventionally utilized is fair trade. I mentioned vegan as being one of these principles, so that's also part of the discipline. And those factors, vegan isn't necessarily expensive if you get whole foods, but processed foods can be very expensive. But particularly fair trade certified foods are expensive and not actually readily available, particularly here on the Western Hemisphere in Turtle Island. on this continent. So it takes some doing, and it takes working with wholesalers and buying in bulk, buying not even just in bulk, but wholesale. And that requires minimum purchases, like a few, one or two pallets, which requires distribution arrangements, shipping. Haha, right. Yeah, the prompt went away, and the tech ain't complex, but it's new, and I didn't want to shut this joint off whilst in the middle of recording, so it just rang. And so wholesale purchases is involves minimum purchases, and that requires some cooperation. Unless cat's got stacks of dough to shell out. But even then, through the years, we work on co-ops and building that, and work on other alternative currencies and other methodologies of economic exchange that are increasingly ethical, and supporting the experience of community and community building and inter-community building. So those are some of the things that I work on. Those are some of the things that is intended to be discussed through the series of these episodes and additionally, but it's also part of the methodology, a fundamental foundation of the methodology of supporting this endeavor as well. So we are establishing a number of crowdfunding campaigns, particularly for the purpose of making wholesale purchases, and I intend to share the details of that accordingly. But that's a significant component of this approach. So those are. I have in my notes also to share that I live a very austere life for the past 20 years, but again, I plan to give the details of that. The point of that saying is it can be compared to being a visible man in an invisible society. For example, for the past year, I've spent less than $50 US currency on all necessities: rent, food, transportation, clothing, all that. I spent less than $50. And that's part of adherence to certain ethical principles and discipline, understanding a certain the fundamentals of money, how that works, how it influences people, and additionally, and working towards building increasingly ethical and honest systems of exchange and institutions of exchange. So the part of the purpose of that is recognizing the network of support, the methodology of practice of the principles, and how the approach of this podcast is interwoven with these established conditions and practices. So I'm going to get less coded at the moment, and just kind of get into who I am and what I'm about, because I'm already hinting at that. So that's the podcast, as concise as can be for the moment. And now we get into the photographs. So there are tres photographs. Initially, when I started this this podcast, the initial episodes were focusing on a top 5 list, but it became evident that the top 5 list was leading to a very long, extended conversation. So it's been truncated or reduced to a top 3 list. When I first made my preparations for this introduction, I had identified 5 photographs. So now I've reduced that to 3, which works. And I'm intending to share also some complementary or adjoining photographs with each of the 3 to give a fuller picture on the website notes. And there's also the propensity in preceding episodes of having honorable mentions that are shared in between numero uno and numero dos. But anyways, that's just a side note. So the first photograph that I'm showing on this joint, and also these photographs ain't necessarily the best quality on the video, but the first photograph is one of my favorites. I guess all three of these can be considered one of my favorites. But it is a photograph of me and my family. Mi familia. It includes my far, my more, my brother and my sister. My father, my mother, my brother and sister. And I am in the middle. So in looking at the photograph, you can see a stoic African man, or at least what people would see as African, a dark skin or medium brown, dark skin man with an afro, medium sized afro and bushy beard. He's even smiling on this joint and got his glasses on. And then next to him in the back row is a pretty young woman of light skin from Scandinavia, my Moor, blue eyes, brunette hair, and a beige dress with red and blue stripes. I'm in the middle, chilling with my little bit bigger afro, cheesy grin, smile, light brown skin, and my sister is next to me in her pretty red dress with the white collar and a nice smile, and my brother there has his white button-down shirt on with his own afro and an intelligent kind of look in his face. So this is my family. This is who I grew up with, and this is the foundation of my experience in life. As I mentioned, my far, he comes from a number of tribes, clans, and lands, predominantly of African ancestry, but also including Seminole native of this continent in the area known as Florida, as well as Israeli and Irish as well, amongst our distant ancestors. So if you look at him on the street during his lifetime, he passes away about a decade and a half ago. If you look at him on the street, you would probably just think of him as being an African. And that's pretty much how he identifies himself as well. Although he readily recognizes his mixed ancestry, he predominantly identifies very proactively as African, as a man of African ancestry. Not necessarily with an African consciousness. Most people would say black on this continent, but his heritage, his ethnic heritage, is African. My Moor, as I mentioned, is of European ancestry, specific Scandinavia, and she is straight up Scandinavian. Her Moor is Swedish, and her far is Swedish and Danish. And my Moor is actually born in India, which actually is a significant influence within my life. She is born and raised in India. Her parents are Christian missionaries. Yet her experience is one of, she grows up in boarding schools predominantly, but particularly as a girl, her experiences of the Indian people, and particularly the Indian landscape, and the nature and just life. And that type of awareness is a significant influence as I'm growing up. One of the first films that I remember seeing growing up is Gandhi. And my Morfar, my mother's father, actually interviews Gandhi during his lifetime, and that is a significant influence in my life as well. And so there's that. My far, he's born in East St. Louis. It's just like Oakland, and in the land of the Sioux, the Ojibwe, and additionally Miami. His ancestors come from, as I mentioned, the different lands and tribes I mentioned, and particularly it's appropriate for me to include the experience of the Middle Passage, and the enslavement of a number of my ancestors as well. And obviously that plays a significant factor in my raising and consciousness, as well as all of my ancestry. So this is a foundation of who I am. Now, my parents, in terms of religiosity, are very secular. My far and my more, I'm getting into detail in this joint. My far and my more both are graduated from university. My far is a pharmacist by trade. He practices here in Ohio after his military service and in Korea, and the lessons that he learns of that, and his vowing of his children not being in the military afterwards. And my more is a teacher, and she's retired at this point, but she's a teacher, and she teaches health, physical education. And her family actually settles after she graduates from high school, prep school. Her family settles in the Pacific Northwest, in the Seattle area, and she moves from Seattle here to Ohio to become a teacher, and that's where she meets my far. So that's my family, and I actually have an older brother and an older sister. I actually have 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters from previous marriages of my far. However, I grew up with my younger brother and my younger sister. Before I get into the second photograph, I'll just give a synopsis of my biography from the first photograph to the second photograph. So, I attend a small private school here in the Cuyahoga area for 11 years. The first 11 years of my professional student career, from kindergarten to 8th grade. Graduating class had 13 people in it. So we were very close-knit and knew very much about each other. And a very secure, very sheltered environment. And then when I went to prep school or high school, I went to the local public school. I was very keen on going to one of the private schools here in the Cuyahoga area, because that's what a lot of my classmates do. But I only got a partial scholarship, and at that point, after 11 years of private education, my parents the budget was getting stretched, so I went to public school. That was a culture shock, and it was also a very distinct. It's a difference obviously between private and public, but the demographics in terms of ethnicity is also very distinct. The private school being comparatively Eurocentric, the public school being rather not even Afrocentric, but predominantly of people of African ancestry, because it was still very Eurocentric in terms of its curriculum, but very Afro present in terms of the ethnicity of the people attending. It was probably about 65%, 35%, 65, 35, in terms of people of African ancestry and people of European ancestry, with additional people of additional ethnic backgrounds as well, but it's predominantly the black and white type of scenario. So what's interesting about going to Heights, that public school that I go to, that I graduate from, is that when you walk, particularly during those days, when you walk through the corridors, when you walk through the hallways, you can see, there's a lot of people of African ancestry who go here, a lot of Africans here. But when I was in the honors program, IBAP program, and when you go into those classrooms, it looked very much like my private Eurocentric school. And so it was like literally inside the classroom, it was one environment, but then walking from in the hallways from classroom to classroom, it was a completely different scene. But I was comfortable with that because the classroom environment was very similar to what I was accustomed to. So I was actually at greater ease at the prospect of going to a public school. Now, in my sophomore year at Heights, I'm getting to detail again. I'm supposed to be talking about photographs. Oh, all right, let's see how this goes. In my sophomore year at Heights, we started having protests. And this was during the height of the golden era of hip-hop. Public Enemy was out. People wearing dashikis, the African continent symbols, and the ankh and everything. And so this notion the film Malcolm X was being prepared at that moment. School days had already been made, and so people had this mindset of including Afrocentricity within the schools. And I'm oblivious to a lot of this because I've been raised outside of a different environment, or within a different environment. Haha. So I remember being in honors classes, and the protests were, it was sit-ins, it was protests, it was marches, it was walkouts, all this type of stuff. It was getting big, and so it was unavoidable. And even within the honors classes where things are kind of just denied or avoided, and just focus on the books, couldn't do that even in honors classes. Everybody was talking about it, and so the teachers would stop class, and we would just talk about what was going on. And I remember specifically in one class, Francais, my IB AP French class, Francais, we always have to talk in Francais, and so the teacher is giving a lesson, and she sees that nobody's paying attention to her. Like she's writing on the chalkboard, everybody's just like in their own conversations in the desks. And so she says, okay, en français. She says, okay, we'll talk about it. Mais en français. We're going to talk about it in French. And in talking about it, like my classmates would ask me, yo, Peter, what's going on? What's this all about? And I was shocked because I was like, yo, hold up. You're the ones who've been going to public school for the past 10 years. You're the one who knows the people for the past growing up. What are you asking me for? But it was very evident that how I was seen as like the one person of African ancestry, one of the very few people of African ancestry. So I must know what's going on with the African community. So I kind of got charged with a task of finding out. And so I started thinking about this and just seeing the situation and like understanding what politics are, what racism is, institutional, systemic, this, that, and the other. I already knew about the Three-Fifths Compromise in the U.S. Constitution, but we don't actually believe that though. So anyways, from that, I dropped out of the IBAP program, or at least the IB program, because I was very frustrated. I felt like I had been lied to all that point, like and being denied about my background additionally. And so I rolled in. There's a 5-tier level of classes in terms of honors programs at Heights during those years. IB was at the top, AP was second, then there was accelerated, which was like the middle, then there was expanded, which was kind of just like regular, and then there was standard, which was like almost like remedial. So I enrolled in accelerated, the third level. The Three-Fifths Compromise. That just dawned on me at this moment. That just occurred to me. So anyways, that's what I did for the most part. I took some AP classes like history and English or stuff like that, but for everything else, I just took accelerated. And it was my first time like being in class with people of African ancestry, where that was the predominant scene. And so that kind of shaped me and made and my decision to go to an HBCU. HBCU meaning historically black college university. I actually talk about that in an upcoming episode that already happened. I went to Hampton University, and at Hampton University, I studied economics because that's the thing that everybody was talking about. We need money. We need money to do this. We need money for the community. We need money for jobs. We need this and the other. We need economics. So I studied economics. And as I was studying economics, it became evident that economics wasn't, a BA degree and understanding economics at the BA level was going to be insufficient for me to do what I was supposed to be doing in life. I needed to have a better understanding of how the systems and institutions work to do the type of change that I could be doing in life. So that meant going to business school and law school. Business school to understand institutions, law school to understand the system, how the game works. And so recognizing that my junior year, I started making preparations for that. And my grades were decent during that period. I went to a frat, got caught up in a little bit of selfishness, and drinking, not a lot, but too much as it was. And I kind of got caught up in like the bourgeoisie kind of set of like appearances and just trying to be popular and everything else like that. Up to that point, when I was in high school, I was corny, I was awkward, I was not an outcast, but I was just like a misfit. Like of all the groups, African, European, and additionally, I was okay with, like I was on decent terms, but I wasn't invited to the parties. And I was fine with that. I just went home, watched TV, and sometimes did some homework. I was also over 100 pounds overweight, and so I was very insecure, just very awkward, and I kept to myself. When I went to university, I started running. One of my dorm mates across the hall was like, "Yo, Peter, we can get you running." So I'm like, okay. I never ran further than 100 yards at one time since like middle school. But I was like, well, we'll try. So he took me running, and I went running, and all it took was one time. He wouldn't let me stop. We just kept running. We probably ran for maybe half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile, and he would not let me stop. And in doing that, it just opened my mind, like, yo, I can do this. So every day since that day, for the next year or two, I would run. And in that first year, my freshman year, I dropped 100 pounds. And so then I started getting a big head, and people started calling me pretty and asking me, yo, did you used to have a brother who used to go here? I was like, no, that's me. So I got this confidence. The confidence turned into it felt like a dream, to be honest. I felt like I was living a dream, like being who I always wanted to be, or experiencing what I always wanted to experience. And the confidence turned into cockiness, and just inappropriateness. And I kind of saw that. And my senior year, I kind of like regrouped. Wow, this is a whole lot of detail on the first photograph. So anyway, so I regrouped. I had a car. I financed a car, and I moved off campus because that's what everybody was supposed to be doing after junior year or after sophomore year. But after doing that for my senior year and recognizing that, yo, I have to like buckle down. I have to prepare for law school. I have to focus on my grades, this and the other. I have to focus on learning. I sold my car. I moved back on campus, which was unheard of. You don't move back on campus. Went back to the cafeteria, and did that. And I was like, yo, I gotta like keep my eye on the prize. So that's what I do. And I graduate barely. That's another story though. And I applied to law schools and business schools. And the consideration was me to go to top schools. That was the purpose, to seriously know how the game works. Go to the elite schools. And so guess what? Didn't get to any. I got into university here, Case Western Reserve University, for the law school, which is a very decent school. But I was very disappointed with myself. But that was my prospect. And so I graduated, and that summer I was like, or at the beginning of the summer, right exactly as I graduate, I just was like, okay, I almost tripped up graduating from undergrad. Let me focus. But then right after I graduated, I got accepted into business school. And this particular business program was also at Case, in the MBA program, and it was an accelerated program where I can get my MBA in 1 year, in 3 semesters. But it started that summer, so I was like, yo, I'll take that. And it also allowed me the opportunity to study abroad. And so that's what I do. I started that summer, took an overload of classes. I actually got straight A's that semester. Because I was very motivated to like have a strong GPA in business school and parlay that to reapplying to law school. And so I had straight A's summer semester, and studied abroad in Manchester, England, at the Manchester Business School before it merges with the University of Manchester, although it's right next door. And awesome experience traveling abroad. It's the first time I didn't have that racist buzz in my ear of just like the plantation subordination. And the situation in England isn't utopia for anybody, African, European, Anglo-Saxon, or whatever. But it was just the first time, like, yo, what is that? Is that clearness that I hear? What? It's just like that drone was gone, and I was meeting people from all around the earth, Brazil, and India, in Nigeria, in Sweden. Oh, what? A Swedish brother, yeah. Nigerian brother, yeah. Indian brother, yeah. All that. Brazilian brother, yeah. Of the land of the Guarani. So that opened my eyes. I would say it blew my mind, but it opened my eyes. It woke me up, and I was like, yo, wow, what's going on? So that was an awesome experience, and there's a lot of conversation about that, but a lot of stories about that. But I actually buddy up with a brother and sister from from HBCUs as well, and so we kind of hung tough, and that was a very special experience. So it's a unique experience as well, particularly being 20 years ago when very few people were doing that, and so I'm very appreciative of that. And came back, finished up again barely, because I got into an elite law school, Georgetown University. And when I did that, I was like, "Oh, okay, ain't got to study now." And I was burnt out at that point. Because it was my 5th semester in a row, and I had taken overloaded classes on each of those semesters, and it was burnt. And after I got into law school, there was a little motivation of doing the work. So I got out, I graduated, got the degree, and then I took a year off because a friend of mine was starting a business. I ain't gonna say what it was because it wasn't the most ethical of businesses, and I was still a young head there, and I had a lot to learn. So, but he was starting a business. He was the one of the few cats that was still talking about independent stuff and not just doing the corporate strut. He was talking about political nationalism, and additionally, in terms of people of African ancestry. And so, because of that, I'm like, okay, well, I got to take this year off, and I'll give this a try and get some experience, see what this is about. If it don't work out, then I'll go to law school afterwards. I mean, I was deferring enrollment, so I got permission from Georgetown to defer enrollment. So that's what I do. And the thing didn't work out because I saw that it wasn't what it was about what I was thinking about. So we kind of went our different ways very early in that process. So I had a year to like to work before going to law school because I had already deferred. So I actually got an internship or a fellowship with Amnesty International, a human rights organization, and that was a fantastic experience. I worked in the DC public schools in the Potomac area. Actually, I got put onto the job by Georgetown. I called the career office and was like, "Yo, I need a fellowship for the next year. Can you help me out?" They're like, "Yeah, check this out." So I got a connection with that without even attending a class at Georgetown for that point. Anyway, so I worked for Amnesty International, and that opened my eyes to a lot of things about the human rights side. Business school taught me about like how business works and the institutions and organizations work in the experience of globalization. But again, like I said, I'm coming from the community side of it. I'm coming from like the best I could think of at that moment was entrepreneurship. So then I got this introduction to human rights, and I was comparatively oblivious to human rights. I knew some of it, but I know what oppression was. I know what the absence of human rights was, but what is this notion of it as an advocacy scene, and even let alone what are all the issues around the earth going on? What's happening in Nigeria? What's happening in Myanmar? Or what's happening in East Timor? Or what's happening in Europe, Italy, and additionally. Didn't know any of those issues. I used to know the different heads of state, but that was pretty much it. So at Amnesty, I remember in the lobby, there was on the bookshelves there was there are probably like 8 shelves of books on both sides of the room, just filled with dossiers like a file on every nation, and all this material of all the different issues on every nation. What's going on in this thing for the past 10 years, up to date to the past year, because there are amnesty offices pretty much in every nation, or at least keeping tabs on every nation. And so I was working at the Mid-Atlantic regional office, which later emerges with the legislative office in the Potomac area. So anyways, that was my experience to like the other side of globalization and international cooperation. Beautiful experience, a lot of things, a lot of stories with that, but that was my experience there. After I finished up there, the program that I was working on was talking about human rights in the DC public schools. So my job was to actually go to the schools, the high schools predominantly, but I also went to a number of junior high schools, 9th graders. Went up to principals, went up to teachers and be like, "Yo, we want to come into your class and do workshops on human rights and connect the international sphere of human rights with what's going on in the hood in Anacostia, Southeast, in Northwest, and additionally Northwest. I'm talking about, well, I ain't gonna say all the names of the schools, but those are some places that we were working in. And so a lot of the teachers and principals are very supportive. And the other component of my job was to go to the universities, Howard, Georgetown, George Washington, additionally, and recruit students to do the workshops. So that was a whole lot further than what I was thinking. But I did decent. Actually, I did decent. I was starting the program. It was a pilot program, and the office had gotten special funding from the headquarters or whatever to do this initiative. And so I kind of like started it, and then after doing it, I kind of after the school year and all the trials and tribulations, it continued afterwards. And I shared a report of what I did, who I talked to, what we did, and everything else like that. We ended up doing tours, walking tours around the neighborhood, talking about the different human rights violations, what to do about it, and additionally, so. And this is my first kind of like actual gig after graduating from undergrad. So I was like, all right, decent. This is, all right, I can see myself doing it. Now I also felt like what it was living alone in a city and like being with people during the day and then at night, crickets. And so that taught me some stuff as well. So anyways, finished that up. Then I went to law school, and that was the best of times, the worst of times. And we're getting to the second photograph. Haha, yeah. I got to law school, and already, like I said, I already knew about the Three-Fifths Compromise. The Three-Fifths Compromise is basically Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3 of the U.S. Constitution that establishes a four-tier caste system where people of European ancestry, effectively with land, who are property owners, are at the top. The second category are people of European ancestry who are in debt. The third category people are people of African ancestry who are not actually people, but subhumans, who are just here for slavery purposes. And then the fourth category of beings is native brethren, who don't even count as anything. And so that might seem very harsh, and it might seem very archaic, and like, oh, of course we don't believe that. Everybody's equal today. And it says so in the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Actually, was it the U.S. Declaration? The Declaration of Independence, because it precedes the U.S. So we believe everybody's equal. So that's just some benign kind of archaic shibboleth that the forebears, the founding fathers, just put together. But we know better today. So that was my mindset going into law school. Like, it's here. We don't actually believe it, and that's what everybody says. But I need to go to law school to actually like see what the actual deal is. Now the thing is, we never talk about it in law school, even in constitutional law, even in the most liberal experiences of constitutional law. We don't talk about it. We talk about all these other different things about political philosophy and ideology and personal liberty and the Bill of Rights and everything else. We talk about property and human beings statutorily established as property, just as a matter of fact, because that's the premise of the legal construct of relationship between human beings and material items in this society. So it's not a question of dehumanization or anything. It's just like, this is what it is. So anyways, all that being said, I learned through law school that, guess what? It is the law. It's still on the books. It's still the law on the books, regardless of the amendments, regardless of the Bill of Rights, regardless of the constitutional amendments, regardless of affirmative action, regardless of reconstruction, and additionally, it's still, regardless even of Obama, who becomes president after I graduate, but it's still the law on the books, and it explains the reversion towards the continuing persecution, oppression, affliction, torture, enslavement, and just bad things that happen to black folk, African folk on this land, and not just African folk, but all types of folk, European, native, and additionally. And so, yeah, that's law school. In my first year was hellish. Well, yeah. Not just because of the law. I mean, yes, the learning a law that tells me about my ancestors being subhuman. That's a challenge to the soul, and that's soul wrenching. That's difficult there. But even beyond that, even in addition to that, there's the recognition that just studying law is tough itself, is hellish itself, because it trains people to understand how to get through things, how to deal with nasty things that happen in life, and settle disputes, settle conflicts, settle hostilities between people. And so to be able to do that effectively, it requires certain acclimation towards hellish conditions to be able to think clearly, to find out what's the appropriate solution to quell the issue, not just keep people in check, but to keep people well. So regardless of what the law is, studying it is always difficult. And so it was difficult to discern during that period and even afterwards how much of law school was difficult because that's just the nature of law school, and how much of law school was difficult in my experience because it was the nature of the law. So I finished first year. I stopped going to class. How did I graduate, or how did I pass my classes? That's another question. But I got passing grades. I was enough for me to continue. And I was like, whoa, okay, they're gonna let me continue. All right, I'll go. Now, second summer after I finish, I go to Africa. I go to South Africa. And it was the only program, study abroad program available in Africa at that time. And it was put on by Howard University, so that's what I do. And again, another awesome experience. Has some very beautiful brethren that I study with, most of whom are from the U.S. as well. But just being on African soil, it was a soul affirming experience. How about that? After the soul wrenching, and it basically gave me a sense of peace through the conversations that I had with local African brethren. And additionally, it was just a matter of whatever I go through for the next 2 years in law school, and additionally, it's going to be okay. Like I have fulfilled a significant quest in walking on African soil. I felt when I stepped on the tarmac off the plane on Johannesburg and Joburg in Zululand, as the day is cracking with the soleil revealing. It was dark. It was quiet because it was early in the a.m. After a overnight flight from London, Heathrow, and I stepped on the ground. And exactly when I do, I just thought to myself, "Yo, I'm on African soil. Yo, I could feel my ancestors rushing back home, and not just my ancestors, but the ancestors of everybody I knew who progressed through the Middle Passage. I could feel them like running home, and it was just a sense of peace. And I wasn't very religious during that period, but it was a very spiritual experience. And again, like I said, it was a sense of peace from that. So came back from law school, and I just like with a not even a determination, but just like a resolution of just like being okay, being happy, like being well. So when I started law school again, the nice thing about law school, after first year, you can choose all your classes. It's all electives. Now, it behooves people to take electives that are going to train them to do something that people are going to want to pay them for. So it's not just a matter of like taking whatever you want to take effectively, but there is that option. So I basically took what I wanted to take, and I took a lot of different classes that deal with the experiences of different cultures, Asian American ideology, legal ideology. I tried to take a number of Iberian-based classes, but people usually had to be a grad student for that. But whatever was like from a different experience than my own, I wanted to take a course in that. Now, to be honest, I have to give a disclaimer. I did drop out of the Asian American legal ideology after the recommendation of the professor saying, "Yo, you haven't been reading. Yo, you're not going to pass this joint, regardless of what you write on your paper." I was like, "Oh, okay. That's nice to know." That's another story, though. But anyways, that's what I do. The big thing also is that, when I was walking through the hallways, when in an environment of law school, and particularly in elite law school, where it's very competitive, people are vying for the same jobs and everything else and wanting to get better grades over each other, people don't talk to each other. People look at the ground when they're walking the hallways, don't say hi, whatever else. And so I made it a point, like I was going to look everybody in the face. I was going to look everybody in the eye, and anybody who looked at me, I'm going to say hi. And I do that, and like people start saying hi back, and not even just saying hi back, but we started having convos, and people used to be comfortable with me, like saying, "Oh, okay, Peter's a dude, okay, dude." And plus, I was cool with like all the people from the different ethnic communities, and additionally, so anyways, I guess also the fact that I knew I wasn't going to practice law, that made me not a competitor, so people weren't concerned about that. Look, I was invited to the parties. Actually, I was invited to a lot of parties during those years. In that second year, I also started working in the International Programs Office, and I became an assistant teacher. Fashion that. A teacher's assistant, for the program that gave orientation to lawyers, international lawyers who are studying to get a graduate degree in LLM at the law school, at the law center. So in doing that, that leads to the second photograph. How about that? it took less than an hour to get there. And this joint is going to shut off very soon because that's the duration. But the second photograph is a photograph of myself and about 100 or so, probably over 100, 150 or so other people, other brethren from all around the earth. It is a class photograph of actually, I'm going to pause right here just to do a preemptive pause so that I can be mindful of it rather than being cut off in the middle of saying something. So we pause here for the next segment. I have a bell sound. Ding. Ding. We're back with segment dos. I'm talking about the second photograph. And so, as I mentioned, this is a photograph of myself and over 100 other dear brethren from around the earth, legal practitioners, lawyers from around the earth. So this is the photograph for those watching the video. And I'm dealing with a reverse angle type joint. There we go. So I'm by Cass to try to find me in this joint. There it is. So the photograph is taken in front of the law library at the Georgetown University Law Center. Fun fact is that the law center is actually located away from the main campus in the heart of the Potomac area, Washington, D.C. The main campus is located towards the end of the northwest quad by the Potomac River. Very picturesque kind of scene on the hilltop overlooking the river, which looks actually very different today than when I was attending because there was a lot of renovation, or not even renovation, but building in the past few years or so. So that's where the main campus is. And I actually take a number of classes at the main campus outside law school, the law center. The law center itself is actually in Capitol Hill, like a block or two away from the Supreme Court. Actually, a block or two away from the Capitol building, and then a couple additional blocks away from the Supreme Court. And it's a campus in its own right, and it's actually looks very different from when I attend as well, because there's been a lot of building there too. So it's actually one of the largest law schools, at least during the time I attend. I got a little bit of a scratchy eye right now, and I'm trying not to rub it. One of the largest schools, law schools on this continent. I think about a student population of 2,000 TzuriJis, and a lot of international students. And it was a beautiful experience for me, connecting with international students. And this is an occasion where I had just finished my second study abroad, meeting people from around the earth, being provided with generous hospitality, and being very appreciative and humbled by the experience with brethren from around the earth in those study abroads. And this was an opportunity for me to be the host, and so I relished that opportunity. And just because that's my scene, and I could see that that was like where my home is, and it's a crux of a homeostasis, because it's like only having a sense of home when being away, and I think that's a lot about the experience of being mélangé. Part of it being not enveloped in the presumptions and the put-upons of those who are seemingly like ourselves. Oh, and I got a call coming up too. Hee-haw. All right. So, anyways, I got the opportunity to host, and got to play some footy as well on this soil, on this continent. So that was very appreciative. I appreciate that, and. Also, the other thing that I appreciate were that these were lawyers that were not practicing the U.S. law per se. I think most were not practicing the U.S. law, and so I didn't have that kind of bug in the back of my brain of like the fox and the hound situation, where the fox and the hound get along as pups, but eventually recognize like, oh, hold up, you're a hound, and oh, yo, hold up, I'm a fox. What? How that's gonna work as adults? Me with my additional collegial brethren at Georgetown Law, who are preparing to take the bar and practice law and like enforce. I didn't have that with the foreign lawyers at Georgetown, and that's one of the things that was easier for me to kind of like just vibe with. So appreciate that. Now I vibe with my additional Georgetown brethren as well, but there is that continuing kind of lingering kind of distinction. So that's the second photograph. Haha. Now we get towards the third photograph. Now there's probably about a 10-year distinction between the first photograph. It's a 10 to 15-year distinction between the first and the second paragraph, or the first and the second photograph. And then there's about about a 10-year period between the second photograph and the third photograph that I'm about to show. So before I share what the third photograph is, I'm going to give a little bit of a snippet of my life in between the second and the third photograph. So the second photograph of me in front of the law library is when the summer before my third year, and shortly after that photograph, I got beat down by the popo and then charged with a federal felony assault with a penalty of 25 years in federal prison during my third year of law school. And basically, I was out with a friend on where I live in the village where I live, called Admo, very popular with restaurants, bars, and stuff like that. I had a few drinks, but that was less consequential. However, what I did do was I was walking on some scaffolding. The sidewalk was blocked off. I guess people were doing some renovation of a building front or whatever. And instead of walking in the street around the scaffolding, or walking all the way around like 4 different intersections to get to the other side, it was a big street. It was a wide street. And it was a big intersection with like a lot of different streets are intersecting. And so instead of walking around all the streets to go to the other side of out of the street I was walking on, I walk on the scaffolding. Now, yes, rather than being drunk with alcohol, I was drunk with like a sense of pride or ego of like I can not necessarily do what I want, but to be honest, actually, I go through a logical process, and this is extreme detail, but it's some relevance. So, anyways, now if I walk in the street, police stop me, because that's what, in that particular area, I lived there for 3-4 years, and I've seen police just stop people for walking on the street, and like lock people up, and that's not a joke. That's like serious, and so I've personally seen that numerous occasions, and so I knew just by walking around the scaffolding in the street, I was availing myself to being accosted by the police for doing that, and so like, okay, that's breaking the law. And walking around, it would literally take probably walking about over 500 meters, 5 football fields, just across the street where I was, in a legal sense, to go through all the crosswalks. It's just implausible. So if I'm going to break the law one way or another, I'm going to walk on the scaffolding, because technically I'm not in the street, and I haven't seen anybody get hemmed up by the police by walking on the scaffolding. So that was kind of my thumb in my thumbing the nose towards not necessarily the police, but just the law, of like, oh, okay, if you're gonna do this, then I don't know any law against walking on the scaffolding. So that's what I did. That was basically the logic. And then I guess the police didn't like that, because they saw me doing it, and I wasn't acting a fool, whatever. I was just walking, and I was getting ready to go on. I got to the other side of the scaffolding, back to the other side of the sidewalk, and I continued walking. And then some police officers like, yo, come over here, stop over, or something like that. And I was like, oh, here we go. So for those who are unaccustomed to this scene, and I've been there are occasions of me being stopped and belittled and disrespected by the police before, and it's unpleasant to say the least. And it's something that one has to get mentally prepared for, to just be insulted and not do anything back, not even say anything smart back, but just absorb the abuse and the disrespect, the dehumanization. So I was like, oh, I was getting ready for that, but it takes some doing. So I guess I didn't stop quick enough, and one of the police officers grabs me from behind, and I'm not accustomed to being grabbed by anybody. And so my immediate reaction, my instinct was just like to shrug my shoulder back to like get the person's hand off me. And I was like, yo. And then right when that happened, the lights went out in terms of in the eyes of the officers. They weren't thinking at that point. They got the batons and just started beating. I was out there with my roommate. He was in the street, walking on the street. And so one of the officers started wailing on him, and then another officer started wailing on me. Now, I'm just trying to have a conversation. I'm just trying to be like, yo, let's talk. Yo, let's talk. And the other officer is actually a woman, and she actually was bigger than me and taller than me. And she was the one who was beating me with the baton. And I'm just like, yo, I'm trying to look in the eyes. I'm like, let's it's unnecessary to beat me. I'm talking. I'm not fighting. Simultaneously, I'm not taking like the blows either, because yo, it's one thing to be grabbed from behind and have that instinct of like shrugging one's shoulder to get the hand off one person. But then when somebody's wailing with a baton at my body, my head, and everything, I have my arms up to defend myself. I'm not striking. I'm not hitting. I'm not kicking. I'm not doing anything that's aggressive or offensive towards causing injury or assault towards anybody. I'm simply defending myself. And then when I'm being grabbed, I'm just trying to keep a distance and push the other person away. And that's what happened. So as I was being grabbed, I pushed the officer off of me, and other additional officers came in, and then it just came in. So that's when I got the Rodney King treatment, lightweight, not nearly beaten as bad as he did, but enough. And then I got locked up for the weekend, and that was actually the same weekend as the student of color orientation that I was supposed to host for the new students coming into the law school. So I didn't make that. I got released actually a block away from where the event was at the law center, because the courthouse is again only a block or two away from the law center. So exactly when I got released 3 days later was when the event was, and I walked exactly as the event was concluding. And the brother from the Asian, I was actually the president of BALSA, the Black Law Student Association, during that period, and the president of APALSA, the Asian Pacific American Law Student Association, kind of took the reins of hosting. I had already made arrangements for everything, so they said it went decent, but then I was just like salty. So anyways, that was my experience, and it just showed me like, yo, this ain't no joke. Cats are playing for keeps. And it wasn't after the police found out I was a law student and this and the other. It wasn't a matter of, oh, okay, we'll let it go with just the beatdown we imposed. They're like, oh, no, that's not enough. We're gonna prosecute with a federal felony, because any crime in the District of Columbia is a federal crime, because it's not actually a state or its own municipality. It's actually a federal jurisdictional municipality or entity. And the charge of assaulting a police officer was a felony. So the charge or the penalty involved with that crime is 25 years in federal prison. So that's what I was charged with. That's what I was facing. And so that first semester, third year, I had that charge hanging over my head, and the court date, which was actually the last day of classes that semester as well. So anyways, long story short, they dropped it on the day of the trial. So I had that weighing over my head over the whole semester. No refusal to like plea bargain, or refusal to like reduce the charges, or refusal to talk about anything. Just no, we're going for it, we're prosecuting. And then all of a sudden on the day of the trial, when I have my witnesses and my character witnesses and everybody else, including my boss who at the child care center that I worked at for the 2 years. I guess the prosecutor was just like, oh, okay. So they basically dropped the charges. I was on papers for a year, but after that, the charges were dropped. So basically, when it came to the United States of America versus PETA, the United States of America broke itself. And that might sound like hubris. It might sound like pride. It's a matter of fact. And it wasn't pleasant. And it wasn't the end. So, that being said, continued on with law school, graduated. Way long. Continued on with law school, graduated. Didn't graduate as scheduled or as planned. I had some additional agreements with professors. So anti-authoritarian. So they failed me, and that required me taking another semester. That's what I do, and that's when the 11th of September happens, and that's when things don't change. So when I'm preparing to finish law school, recognizing that I'm not planning to take law or to practice law, at least American law, I'm like, I got to do something. And so I work with a number of colleagues in starting a multicultural think tank, and basically coordinating colleagues to write articles about the issues within each one's own community: Latino, Asian, Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, European, African, all that, Native, and additionally, brethren. I have collegial brethren from all these different communities through my experience in law school, and additionally up to that point. And so the interest was like having some kind of like mosaic think tank that had a newsletters akin to the Crisis for the NAACP a century ago, and just like be that kumbaya type institution that builds bridges amongst the different communities in the capital, where all these communities have representatives and are focusing on policy issues. And additionally, so that was the concept, that was the intention, the objective of the organization. The challenge was, even before the 11th of September, I was getting crickets in terms of reaching out to professors to kind of back this up and provide leads and connections of people who would support it, who would fund it, organizations who would fund it, philanthropies, institutions, funds, trusts, additionally foundations. Professors weren't backing it, and I guess for whatever reason, I was already starting to have a blacklist type of classification because of my intention not to practice law. And I didn't think that was a big deal during that period. But when the 11th of September happens, definitely cats weren't trying to hear that. Cats were talking about kumbaya at all. It was us versus them. Circle up the wagons. You're either with us or you're against us. And I was like, I'm not with you. So you can do the math on that joint. I'm with us, which includes all. So, but cats weren't trying to hear that. Cats weren't trying to hear the diplomacy at all. Nothing. Hysterical, paranoia, and this is amongst cats who are like supposed to be cold-blooded, hysterical. And I just like, I could see the writing on the wall. Like, it's not going to be pretty. Like, there's not going to be room for negotiation. There's not going to be room for a middle ground here. And so, seeing the writing wall when I graduate, legitly or completely after that autumn semester, I moved back to Ohio, and I was like, okay, I gotta like refigure things out. And in moving back to Ohio, back to my childhood home where my family is, it didn't stop. Like the paranoia, the hostilities, the vitriol, the hatred, all that didn't stop. Now, my family basically identifies in a similar way that I do in terms of like getting along with others, this and the other. It wasn't a matter of hatred, but my family is increasingly inculcated, involved or enveloped within mainstream society through work through relationships and additionally. And so my seemingly militant stance of multiculturalism and pluralism was further difficult for my family to get on board with, because there's a lot of scrutiny against that. And that was very frustrating for me. And so then there was started to become static between myself and my family, particularly my parents, particularly my mom, to the point where I eventually get locked up in psych ward. And that was extremely frustrating, because already I was frustrated after spending over 3 years in law school, studying a law that dehumanizes people, and being told, well, just let bygones be bygones, do the best you can, forgive and forget. You have to understand the context, this and the other. All this calls to be like understanding for oppression. But then when the same people who are doing oppression, the same system and institutions that are doing oppression, experience affliction, now it's out for blood. Now there's payback. We want revenge. There's no middle ground. Wait, hold up. What happened to all this turn the other cheek, and what happened to forgive and forget and everything else like that? Oh yeah, that's for you, but that ain't an option for us. Now I'm using the second person again, but anyways, that was extremely frustrating for me. And what I've learned about not just the psychiatric practice, the practice of psychiatric medicine, but just life, is in life, our anger, our frustration, our hostility is utilized against us. And so everything, even as righteous as I am, and as I think I am, particularly during those years, there's a way to be righteous. And truth is 1% what we say and 99% how we say it. And anyways, long story short, I was angry. Then I got locked up in psych ward, and then I became like very angry and very frustrated, but like deep-seated, quiet. And that's kind of set the scene. And that's what prompted my spiritual path. And I figured to myself, if national law, if the U.S. law is insufficient to abide by and to live by, if I can't dedicate myself and commit myself to upholding that, I need to find a law that I do believe in. And I knew enough about international law that international law has yet to establish itself as a pragmatic rubric to follow as well, because it's just a collective of nations that has yet to establish a definitive, authoritative, legal construct or apparatus. So I knew that as well. I was like, okay, if this isn't it, I'm gonna have to try religion. And so by that point, I had already built relationships with people from all different types of backgrounds. We talked about life, we talked about universe. We didn't talk about religion per se too much, but we talked about the elements of religion and spirituality. And so I knew enough to know that there was enough truth. There's truth in each of these traditions, but I didn't know a lot of the details and teachings. And also, I wanted all the communities that I built relationships with and allegiances with that helped me out through the way to continue to see me as a decent dude, as a righteous man. And so I was like, what do I have to do for the rest of my life to be seen and recognized and supported even as a righteous dude by all these communities simultaneously, not just aligned with one and kind of tolerated by others, but like legit, that's a righteous dude. So I wanted to learn that. And I as much as I resisted the legal training of law school, I did learn a lot about law and about what it's like to live in a discipline or with a ethical discipline. And I utilized that study, that learning, to study further religion, to study the law of earth, the law of the traditions of earth. So still had a strong distrust or lack of trust towards religious leaders, because I saw just a lot of hypocrisy, duplicity, and irrelevance. So it still had strong lack of trust towards religious leaders in general. So I was like, I'll go to as direct to the source as I can. So I identified the predominant religions of earth to be Judaism, the tradition of Israel, being one, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Taoism and Confucianism as part of Chinese tradition. And so I was able to identify some of the predominant scriptures, the written teachings from each of these traditions: the Torah of Israeli tradition, the Bhagavad Gita of Hindu tradition, the Digha Nikaya and the Dhammapada of Buddhist tradition, the Gospels of Christian tradition, and the Quran of Islamic tradition, and the Tao Te Ching of Chinese tradition. That ain't an all-inclusive list. There are other holy scriptures. Additionally, there are other holy scriptures that are increasingly, arguably, and categorically authoritative than the ones I just described. For example, the Rig Veda is considered, and the Upanishads within Hinduism are readily considered further authoritative than the Bhagavad Gita. But the Bhagavad Gita provides a general synopsis and explanation of the teachings from the Vedas and the Upanishads as well. The Gospels is only one portion of the New Testament within Christian canon, but it is the teachings of Jesus, as directly as it's provided within Christian theology and scripture. And then in Buddhism, first of all, in Buddhism, there's an absence of reliance upon the scriptures as much as it within Abrahamic traditions. It's increasingly a matter of studying with a teacher and learning to practice samadhi, to meditate, and to apply the lessons of the Vinaya, or as near to the Vinaya as possible, like the ethical discipline of the Sangha of the religious community, in one's daily practice. So it's not a matter of studying and learning like laws or codes or doctrines or even stories. It's part of it, but that's not the epitome of it. The epitome of it is studying with a teacher and learning how to do it. But in looking at the Pali Canon of Buddhism, which is the aggregate of the written works, particularly within the Theravadan system of Buddhism, the Digha Nikaya is up there in authoritative hierarchy. The Dhammapada is increasingly perhaps what may be considered as poetic, but it's very commonly recognized and commonly read, probably one of the most common Buddhist texts of the traditional canon. But if anything is considered the most authoritative, it would be the Abhidhamma. But the Abhidhamma specifically teaches people how to be a monastic practitioner of the bhikshus, of the community of monks and nuns, bhikkhunis. So I knew I was going to do that. So I found something that was as proximate to that as possible, and amidst additional consultation with others, I settled with the Digha Nikaya and the Dhammapada. So anyways, that's what I study, and I read each one from front to back. The Tao Te Ching is actually the first religious book that I read from front to back. When I was actually in law school, I did it because it's extremely accessible, and it's not doctrinal. It's not preachy. It's just like, this is the way, this is the Tao. And it's not even, it does talk about government and society, but it talks about nature, and then it applies the principles of nature to government, and additionally, so it's very accessible, particularly for a secular Western intellect. That was the first book I read, and then after I graduate, I started and begin my spiritual path. I read the Gospels from front to back. I read the Torah from front to back. I read the Quran from front to back. I read the Bhagavad Gita from front to back. I read the Digha Nikaya and the Dhammapada from front to back. And after I finish each one, I started again. And I begin a yearly cycle of study of each of these scriptures, so that I complete a cycle each year. Wow. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up because I'm already late. Oh, and somebody's calling me too. Psyche. So I do that, and I diligently search for other people who are doing this as well, who are searching to continue to build bridges. Yes, across ethnic distinctions of our communities, but also across religious distinctions. And I eventually find the interfaith movement, and at that point, again, particularly at that period, I was giving very little ear to any American, anybody in the United States. So I wasn't looking for organizations in the United States per se. I was looking at organizations outside, because even if people had an interest and were willing to communicate with me and do something with me, cooperate and build community or organization with me, I knew that the people who backed them, who are supporting them, who give them the money, the food, the sustenance, the shelter, and everything else, are very much less likely to share that interest and enthusiasm. And so, and I didn't have the luxury of like pretending otherwise. So gave Americans extremely little ear, and just looked outside of the U.S. And so I study. I find organizations, and I find the interfaith movement. I find organizations that are doing that internationally, but also in the U.S. And so after a number of years pass, and after I kind of become increasingly solidified in my spiritual walk, I become increasingly receptive to working with people on this continent and in this land. And so I started getting involved with interfaith work here in the Cuyahoga area. I find out about an organization called Interact Cleveland that does programming for a couple of days. Or a couple of decades. It's closed up at this point. Closed out about a decade ago, actually, rather interestingly enough. But back then, it's actually doing a lot of stuff, and I appreciate that. And I start working with that organization. I get involved with the Heights Interfaith Council, which is a council of clergy, predominantly of Protestant Christian organizations or Protestant Christian congregations here in the Heights area, which is the area where I grow up, the suburb right outside of Cleveland where I grow up. So I become a member of the Heights Interfaith Council, and I regularly attend meetings and the functions and help coordinate programs accordingly. I reach out to the Baha'i community. Actually, that's how I found out about these. I reach out to the Baha'i community, and the Baha'i community tells me about these. And I start going to interfaith devotionals with the Baha'i community. I get involved with a Jewish synagogue and actually complete the process of conversion within Judaism. I go to the masjid, and I begin offering salat and going to Jummah prayer at the masjid. I eventually attend Gurdwara and Langar at the Gurdwara. I attend a number of the holy events. I'm going on 2 hours at this joint. A number of the services, the religious services at a number of the different Christian denominations: Catholic, Baptist, Episcopal or Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran. I mean, each one of these are members of the Heights Interfaith Council, and I go to the houses of worship and attend services within each one of these. I go to the Buddhist temples, and I meditate. I perform samadhi at the Buddhist temples, and so I entrench myself in the spiritual experience of these different communities, because this is who I am. And I see the truth, and after the truth is shared with me, and I'm able to make peace with my conditions, like I'm able to learn how to let go of the anger that I feel with the injustice, and start learning the righteousness of love and compassion, forgiveness without acceptance, like forgiveness without forgetting, and forgiveness while still protecting ourselves and like working to do what's right, but letting go of the anger, and letting go of the hatred, and learning how to do things right. I get that insight and that guidance through these teachings, and not just teachings from any one tradition. It's from all these traditions, from the Quran, from the Dhammapada, from the Torah, from the Gospels, from the Bhagavad Gita. When we talk about Sri Krishna talking with Arjuna on the battlefield at the prospect of fighting his own cousins who are corrupt and trying to take over the world, and Sri Krishna talks to Arjuna and says, "Yo, there's never been a time when you and I and the kings gathered here have not existed, and never will there be a time when we will cease to exist. We're all part of the same eternal, infinite phenomena. And so this is just part of the sequence of life. And now let's understand the nature of it so that you can proceed in the optimally righteous manner." So that's my life, yo. So each one of these speak to me, and each one of these guides me, and I have to abide and honor and respect each of these. So that's my walk. And that's what I continue to do. So the third picture that I have, the third photograph, is a photograph, that emerges from a specific initiative that the Interfaith Interact Cleveland organizes. It's actually about a decade ago at this point, and it was a memorial event for the 10th year commemoration, or I'm trying to think of the right word, the 10-year memorial after the 11th of September. Now, this was very difficult for me to get on board with because this was also organized in conjunction with the federal government, the FBI. That's another story as well. But despite all that, I recognized the higher purpose. I had attended the Parliament of the World's Religions in Warren Jerry land a year or two prior to that. So I traveled abroad, in addition to other travels I had done to Cuba and Jamaica, and additionally on some other joints. But I attended the Parliament, and I met brethren from all different communities, but not only just like cats who are doing stuff. I'm showing the photograph of that as a prelude, but cats who are like doing stuff internationally in the interfaith movement, like the cats that I would see or that I would exchange emails with, or that I would see posts about and stuff like that. I actually got to meet and talk with at the Parliament, and so that was a very strong, and that was the first. It was one of the first significant events outside of the Cuyahoga area that I attend. Because even though I was organizing here in the Cuyahoga area, I wasn't doing stuff around the continent nationally amongst national-based interfaith organizations, again, for the same reason that I said before. When I went to the Parliament, that kind of eased up on that kind of restriction, and I could see the continuity better. I not even can see it, but I could work with the continuity better. And so anyways, that's what I do. And that's what precipitates my working with the commemoration or the memorial for the 11th of September 10 years ago. And so the third picture is a photograph. It's actually a still shot of a video that promoted the memorial event. How do we do this? All right. That promoted the memorial event, where representatives from the different congregations that were involved in the planning stand in front of the cityscape, the skyline of the Cleveland downtown, the public square area, and record a video that welcomes people to participate in the memorial event. And so I was responsible. I was on the committee that coordinated that promotional video for the event. And so it's a tangible representation of the Kumbaya here in the Cuyahoga, and I appreciate that amidst all the conditions and everything else. So that's an illustration of the work I do since graduating from law school, and that I continue to do. Now, since that point, nearly 10 years ago, I continue with my spiritual diplomacy, and I continue with my spiritual diplomacy. My emphasis, my forte is in scriptural reasoning. So I continue with the scriptures. And what I've recognized is that my knowledge of any one tradition is very much at the University 101 level. Like it's not even that. It's probably actually, I shouldn't be that self-deprecating. It's probably at the BA level at this point. Like I have or at least the associate degree level. So I have a fair command of each of the traditions that I mentioned, and not just from studying, but through practice as well. My language skills are very modest, so that's probably the biggest hurdle in advancing my proficiency in the practice of each religion. I am able to read certain languages and script and characters, but anyways, my command is at around the associate level in general for each of these traditions. Whereas there are people who obviously are BA levels, bachelor's levels, are at master's levels, at PhD levels, and additionally. So the cats who know way much further than I do in any one of these religious traditions. However, that being said, the vast majority of those cats, 99% of those cats who have an advanced understanding about one tradition, have a very less of an understanding of any other tradition aside from that one tradition. Some might have a keen understanding of one other tradition. Like there may be many Islamic clerics that have an understanding of Christianity for the purposes of rapprochement accordingly. But when it comes to all the aggregate of these, very few at this moment have the type of knowledge that I do on each of these traditions or within each of these traditions. And it is what it is. I initially share that for the purpose of communicating a modesty in my spiritual, my traditional acumen. However, it may sound immodest in terms of nobody has it like I do, but my purpose for saying that is that there is benefit in having a thorough, if I could say that, understanding of the teachings and the practice within each of these traditions for the purpose of reconciliation, for the purpose of providing guidance in terms of curriculum development, consultation, and additional services and education and teaching for others, whether those others are religious leaders, other scholars, students preparing for various types of occupations, and additionally, many of the people who have an awareness of multiple religions is like what I said before. If it's a religious leader, usually it's a bilateral understanding where they have a expertise in one's own background, and then maybe a learned expertise in another background for the purpose of interaction and relationship between communities just within those two groups. The other kind of scenario is where it's a secular scholar who doesn't subscribe to any of the, or doesn't necessarily subscribe to any of the teachings within any of the traditions, but actually knows what they are, and has an intellectual awareness, understanding, or memorization of what the teachings are, if other than an actual experiential insight of what it's like to practice and believe in these teachings. So that's one of the distinctions between myself and other people who professors of comparative religion. And additionally, my purpose is other than being a university professor and getting tenure, this and the other. My purpose is in promoting pluralism and promoting the well-being of others and preparing individuals for building community, building village, building families, building a relationship, building a sense of self amidst those who are different from ourselves. And so that includes curriculum, that includes written materials. I've written a lot through the years, and I'm working on publishing that at this moment. It's already available, but the consideration is publishing it through conventional means where it's increasingly receptive by mainstream or people amidst the mainstream. So I've written a lot, I've recorded a lot. I've put together a number of anthologies of scriptural writings, and with vetted translations from comparatively conservative and orthodox scholars or writers within with each of these respective traditions. So it's other than anyways, the purpose is pluralism and finding understanding, cooperation, harmony, prosperity amidst our differences, and having educational tools, books, curriculum, fields of study, consultations, advisement, from an experience of this pluralism. And particularly for people like myself who are mélangés, who are predisposed to this type of pluralism, I share this for the benefit that it serves. What I've found is that there is a there are a few formulas for this. I mentioned Melange, wisdom and righteousness. To do that, the initial stage is building our patience. Patience is the foundation of all benevolent things in this life. Love, peace, harmony, reconciliation, understanding, forgiveness, trust, all that begins with patience, a foundation of patience. We all can build up patience. Everybody can do this. What I found is a 3-step formula for doing that. The first step is to be still, just to stop what we're doing and just be still. And in being still, then being quiet. Not worrying about communicating ourselves, getting what we have to going out, have to get out. Just being quiet. And being quiet, then being honest. So that's like a third, but it's a kicker, because we don't have to listen. Once we're quiet, we're already listening. We're already paying attention to what's going on around us. The consideration is to be honest. What's relevant? Is the person talking in front of me relevant? Is the vitriol that's coming at me relevant? Are the compliments and the flowery words that are coming to me relevant? Are they actual? Are they honest? What is honest in any of that, if anything? What's honest in what I'm thinking in response, or what I'm interested in influencing? What's honest about that? What is honesty? What is truth? When we are still, when we are quiet, we have a better perspective about what is honest, what is truth. And then when we do that through that process, we are calm. And we are attuned with the harmony of the universe, the Tao, the will of God, the will of Allah, however we want to call that. And then we are equipped. Then the solutions come to us. The solutions just occur. They arrive because we're receiving it. And then we are equipped to proceed with a better understanding, with the better tools in our walk in this life. So that's patience, being still, being quiet, being honest. We each are provided with skills. We each are provided with talent to serve, to provide for the well-being of others, to improve the well-being of others, to inspire others. One of the things that strengthens us in that service is, like I said before, the wisdom of who we are. The songs, the stories, and the rituals that come from before us and that go beyond us, and that we share in this life, that resonates with others because others come from it as well. That's the wisdom, and then the righteousness is the discipline of how to interact with others, how to interact with our relatives, our plant relatives, our animal relatives. Our relatives of the elements, the cosmos, and additionally, being attuned with that, having respect, and knowing how to behave ourselves amidst these circumstances. So I share the fivefold discipline that I found that's taught within each of the scriptures that I mentioned: honesty, sobriety, veganism, marital fidelity, and ethical economics. That's what I share at this point. So I've progressed from being a spiritual diplomat towards being a spiritual teacher, and my emphasis at this point is sharing what I've learned, not necessarily in a preachy kind of way, although that might seem like what this past 2 hours have been. And what even the podcast may seem, because I do get a little bit talkative in some of the previous joints that are upcoming, but I'm working on that, because usually when I'm having convo, I'm actually asking a lot of questions and listening, so I have to work on how to do that in a podcast setting. But like Lao Tzu teaches that in the Tao Te Ching, that the greatest leaders are the cats that you don't even know are influencing you, and so. It's humble, it's humble and modesty, and wisdom with simplicity and even somewhat brevity. So that being said, that is what this is about. That's what these episodes are about. That's what these convos are about. That's much of it. The pauses might be painful, but it prepares for the daily, regular interplay. Anything else to share for this moment? So, yeah, like I said, this is other than just a philosophy. This is other than just ideas. This is a practice. That same truth that I mentioned before of being obligated to practice, that helps to quell the anger and give guidance and how to be righteous. That includes, like I said before, treating people fairly, being compassionate to other sentient beings, animals, providing others fair compensation for the labor that sustains us, that nourishes us, fair trade, and being righteous as we continue in our walks in life. So that's also the methodology connected in the support mechanism for this podcast, in building a paradigm of ethical cooperatives and a system of cooperatives. And something else. My intention is also to work on the aesthetics. The pauses may be purposeful, but so is brevity and conciseness as well. So I continue to work on that. This is one of the first joints, so God willing, I will be able to have additional opportunities and success in making the presentation increasingly palatable, and encouraging others to have patience in receiving what I offer and applying that to individuals' respective practices. In the meanwhile, there are writings, and that's intended to be connected with the podcast as well on the website. Connection with that, I have yet to complete the publication methodology for some of the materials, but that's intended to be included within the offerings. And there's even merch that I have prepared, which includes some original artwork and some mantras that people might find positive, encouraging, affirmational. So again, there are certain parameters with that. The merchandise actually is through a fair trade, vegan, or at least a print on demand type situation that offers t-shirts that are fair trade and vegan, but still working on the mechanics of that. So that being said, this joint is done. Way long, but there it is. For those who have that patience to go for 2 hours on this joint, kudos. And comments on suggestions of what to focus on, techniques for brevity. Because like I said, it's one thing to talk Dolo style into a device. That's one thing. It's another thing to have a conversation with people where you can feel the energy and build off that and invest concentration in what the other person's saying. And then it's another thing to be in convo with a device and a multitude of directions of concentration. So for those who have suggestions on how to frame that, how to facilitate that, that is appreciated. Also, social media. I'm off Facebook, so I don't even do that. And other than posting up a whole lot of joints on YouTube, my acumen or my expertise in like marketing, and additionally, I've taken marketing classes, but that was way before the internet was invented. So social networking, all this other stuff, I have less of an intuitive sense, let alone an institutional awareness or proficiency in knowing where to go. I will share the methodology that we're focusing on, rather than just getting numbers and subscribers, and we're not doing the commercial methodology. We're not doing the monetized type methodology. That's not the option. The option is only through direct contributions from people who support the cause. And even then, it's not a matter of like just getting viewers or subscribers or listeners or downloads or whatever. It's not a numbers game. We're less about the quantity. We're worried about the quality. We're interested in the quantity. It's getting late, yo. All right, we're interested in the quality. That's what I mean to say. The quality. We're less concerned about the quantity. It's the quality. And in that consideration of the quality, we're interested in building a village, literally, like physically, like geographically. We are interested in the work that I do for through the years. We focus on intentional community. The Global Eco Village Network is one institution of note. But connecting with villages in metropolitan areas, whether that's just like a residential co-op, whether that's cats that are living some type of way in a house or whatever, but wherever there's like a village of cats that are of this mindset of global of pluralism and cooperation ethics, connecting with each other and then connecting with the respective communities that surround us, musicians, artists, educators, families, even religious and spiritual leaders who are of the similar mindset. And gravitating towards each other, so we live in physical community with each other, and build even further from that experience. So it's not just an ideology that we meet on a once-a-week basis at the coffee house, whatever, but we're living it day in, day out through better and worse. So that's where our interest is. We've identified 20 cities around the earth that we're focusing and connecting with. We already have connections in these places, and we're working to build that and build from that, and then build with others who get on board as well, or whatever euphemism is appropriate here. It's a shared experience. It's a circle. So who emerge or arise within the circle. So that's what our intentionality is. Village to village building, Africa, Europe, Mediterranean, Asia, and the Western Hemisphere here, Turtle Island, specifically with village to village, and even just connecting with one cat in a village who, through word of mouth, spreads this message, and additionally, and we share our messages, and then through that communication, building cooperation, and exchanging with each other. Whether it's like knowing somebody who has like some fair trade basmati rice, or somebody who does like some sugar from equal exchange, or not equal exchange, although that's cool, but level ground from Colombia and the land of the Yanomami, and additionally, but including the pragmatics of it, the economics with the ethics as well. And being increasingly self-determining amidst our ideology and our idealism. That's what this is about, and is doing it through our convos. There's the intention of sharing features on this joint as well, bringing on storytellers, musicians to share the songs and the stories, and getting a tangible sense of village where we are, but also online. In person and in online. So yeah, we're gonna wrap it at that. Sincere thanks for those who do listen. and for those who continue to build, and so for those who are on this joint together, thanks. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom. Zaijian, adios, TzuriJi, Esembinas, Mugo, Kele Ofed, one love and peace. Greetings, this is Peter. I'm returning another phone call made from this number. I left a voicemail yesterday, so there's uncertainty whether this is just a tag of induced by robocall or if this is actually an intention. There was no voicemail on the previous call or on this call that I can see at this moment. So, yeah, just leaving another message. Love and peace. Bye.
Alright, so that's the joint. That's the joint. So to be honest, actually, before I get into the 2-minute pause at the end, I actually find that to be one of my most coherent, succinct kind of soliloquies that I've recorded almost ever, at least in this sequence of like 2-hour joints on YouTube. And additionally, one of the things that I attribute to that is that I'm telling my story, my life story, and so there's a certain amount of linearity. A lot of the things that I share tend to be about ideas, very conceptual, abstract, and thus it can be somewhat in the clouds for many people. And in this one, it was of the earth, amidst the clouds. So I think that helps to provide some immediacy, tangibility, comprehension on the part of the recipient, at least in this case, that being myself, from myself. So I actually appreciate it. Now, I'm fighting back the yawns at this point. It's 1:15 midnight. It's past the schedule of putting up this podcast. So God willing, I will do it mañana. But anyways, it's a long joint, but I actually find it beneficial in terms of like substance and information and giving a sense of like who I am. I think looking at it, evaluating it in terms like of a fact checking thing, I think it does I do a decent job. I do a decent job of covering the basic bases. Obviously, it's not everything from my life. It's not all the most important things or whatever, but for that kind of duration of a summation of my life, an autobiography, that's a decent job of it. particularly telling episodes that are salient, that are kind of transformative. There's that word again. Or they're near thereby. Haha. Right. So. Anyways, do a decent job. And to be honest, I've actually done a number of renderings of my life story in the past couple of decades, and written as well as audio. And I think that's one of my most effective audio versions of that. So I appreciate that. Now, as for the dose minutes of open space at the end of that, that's a bonus, free of charge. That might sound rather belittling or whatever, but the actuality is that it's late right now. I'm less available to like edit, and that's other than the protocols I described in the joint. How hard is it to just truncate the end of the thing and make it increasingly? Is it gonna make a big difference? 2 hours and 25 minutes compared to 2 hours and 23 minutes. I think the most relevant argument is just like laboring through a 1.5 minute of pause just to get to this section for those who have that interest. Well, for those who have the interest, then it's worth it. If those who abstain from having an interest probably didn't make it to that point anyway. So that's part of the calculation. And here's the other thing too. I make so much of what I have, what I know, what I've learned available. I share it as directly, as fully, as much as possible. And there's actually a certain amount of faultness to that, because one of the factors of effective teachers is not to tell everything. And it's not a matter of being secretive, but it's a matter of allowing the student to do some work. So if the student asks a question, the teacher just gives the answer. The student might remember it, might have difficulty remembering it or whatever. But there's that. However, if the student asks a question, the teacher gives like a pointed response that encourages the student to find the answer on the student's own, then the student has to go through some labor for that which the student loves. And through that labor, there's an increased amount of motivation and even like some breadcrumbs on the trail to actually remember the lesson when it's finally learned. Now, I have yet to like thoroughly incorporate that technique within my style of what I share, if you want to call it teaching, or additionally. So my thing is like I almost do the opposite. I inundate. If I have the information, here's the bag load. Now, simultaneously, there is a certain intrinsic inaccessibility that I tend to do, which is like that, a minute and a half pause. So if it's worth it for Kaz to get through that, then there it is, and here's this extra point. We'll see how much worth it is at the end. But anyways, that's part of the technique. Now, is it the best? Is it the worst? It is what it is at the moment. The other thing also is that, like I said, it's almost half past midnight at this point. For me to edit at this point, it's audio recording. It's actually initially a video, but I've transformed it into an audio file. For me to edit it, I would have to basically, in my knowledge set, I would have to upload this as an audio file onto iMovies, and then I can snip, cut, edit that part of it comparatively easy, but then save it as a video file, then transform it back to an audio file, eat up all the storage in that process, because iMovies are very big in storage, just to reduce that in that process. Well, I don't mean to suggest that it's not worth it for me to like make it increasingly convenient for others. There is that benefit as I talk about presentation additionally, but at this moment, that's other than my priority. So that might sound callous and condescending, whatever, but anyways, how about I talk about it for another 5 minutes just to make it worth it while? Sarcasm. So anyways, there's that. I went through it. I went through the minute and a half of thing, even hearing the nice little return phone call to probably a robocall, and additionally. So that, again, like I said, it's a bonus. You get to see a snippet of life, yeah? Anyway, so there's that. Now, one of the first things I think about at the beginning of the recording of this session, of this introduction, introduction, is that I mentioned the experience of being mélangé and by blood and by bond. So that's like a description I utilized for a while at this point, and it's a way of emphasizing the inclusivity of the experience of being mixed, even for people who abstain from specifically, directly, explicitly identifying as being mixed heritage. So it's a matter of like, oh, you can be mixed by blood or by bond, and if you have an interest in others, that's essentially the part of the experience. So since that point, when I first recorded the introduction, we arrive at another way of articulating that kind of shared interest, that perhaps even solidarity. But basically, instead of limiting it to the context of being mixed or mélangé, mixed heritage, specifically, what we identify as the experience of being pluralism, and that there are cuatro basic categories or experiences of being pluralistic or experiencing pluralism. Category or experience numero uno is multiculturalism and interfaith, which we define as an interest in people of different lands. Numero dos is mixed heritage itself outright, which we identify as, or we define as, ancestry from people of different lands. Numero tres is world citizenship, which we define as commitment to people of different lands, and regardless of what one's ancestry is, and additionally. And numero cuatro is wealth ethos, which we define as discipline with people of different lands. So it's a shared ethical foundation with people who come from different cultures, backgrounds, languages, traditions, religions, spiritualities, whatever. It's a shared ethics. Tribalism, and additionally, shared ethics. So those are the cuatro degrees of pluralism that we identify. I've referenced this in previous joints to my recollection. In numerous joints in the collective of things that I share, but it's appropriate to articulate that because again, this is something that emerges since the original recording of the introduction conclusion, so it's beneficial to provide that. There are additional elements about patience and additionally that I mentioned here that I particularly appreciate, and it's nice to hear. Again, the stories of the different experiences within my life and how that shapes me, how that shapes my worldview, how that shapes my discipline and my spiritual path, and thus my teaching and what I share from that spiritual path and from my studies. And additionally, like I said, there's so many things to cover, and rather than getting into all of it at this point, I think that's much of what I'm going to share at this moment. I can provide that we are focusing at this point with the Sona Ashram, as well as Melody Ethos Institute, but particularly with Sona Ashram, focusing specifically on scriptural reasoning, Tobadi Gogadao, Torah, Bhagavad Gita, Digha Dhammapada, Gospels, Quran, and Date Ching, and teaching that, teaching different classes, lessons, courses on different aspects of Tobadi Gogadao. It might be a topic of social justice, it might be a topic of peace, it might be a topic of environmentalism. But what we're doing at this moment is reaching out to brethren who support our work to provide sponsored scholarship of a class or of an educational project that is based on a topic of interest to the person or the entity, the family, the group that's providing the sponsored scholarship. To complete a lesson plan for in the actual convening of a webinar, a recorded webinar, a live webinar, a basic, very brief, articulation of citations of scriptures from different traditions on a specific topic, a brief pamphlet, a treatise, an extended essay, a full paper, a full lecture, a series of lectures, or a symposium. But anyways, whatever it is, putting that together per the interest and contribution sponsorship from brethren who support our work. So that's what we're working on at this moment, in addition to other things as well. Another along those same lines, our focus is world hip hop law. And so in recent communications, I shared the notion of uh, human society, human civilization, Earth civilization, emerging into a paradigm of pluralism, where the pervading authoritarian constructs need an effective, genuine methodology of pluralism and administering pluralism rather than the imperialistic paradigm of just getting somebody who can deal with people from that area and then try to conquer as much as possible, whatever else. So, pluralism, that's the paradigm that we can see for the next century and further, God willing. And so, the consideration is how hip hop, ironically, beautifully, paradoxically, lends itself to the emergence and the establishment of a pluralistic civilizational paradigm being established. Particularly because hip hop is intrinsically counter-authoritarian, has a very strong suspicion towards authority figures, very strong skepticism, even towards religion, and that's what makes it increasingly an optimal facilitator or conduit for teaching religion, because there's intrinsically a less concern of proselytizing, unduly influence religious adherents in any one tradition, because hip hop, the authenticity within hip hop, is gauged by skepticism and certain suspicion towards authority in general. So that's how religious literacy can be taught as literacy rather than as proselytizing. So, anyways, world hip hop law is an endeavor along those lines where we build a framework of awareness from regarding Earth and human civilization in general, human law, the foundation of the Earth Constitution, which is Tabari Gokadao, Torah Bhagavad Gita, Digna Nikaya, Dhammapada, Gospels, Quran, Tao Te Ching, and then from that recognize hip hop as a civilizational phenomenon, not just a cultural or musical phenomenon, but a civilizational phenomenon. From Middle Passage to Liberation, and how it's embraced by the earth, and how through the guys, through the vantage of hip hop, having a stronger command of the ethics of Earth, and the law of Earth, and pluralistic authority of Earth. So that's much of it. That's what we're working on at this point. And that emerges from the life experience that is provided, that is gleaned, that is shared, that is blessed, thankfully. Alhamdulillah, Baruch Hashem, Hallelujah, Jai Om, within the past few months during the sequence of this podcast. So the convo continues on numerous levels, and it's a beautiful thing. It ain't the easiest thing, but it's a beautiful thing. So what else to share at this moment as we wrap up? My endeavor for marriage with a woman continues, and that's a long story, but it continues. So, anything else happening at this point to wrap it up? Probably should like share a song, share a maybe a story or something, like just as like a proper kind of like send off, build up, whatever's. Hiya. Well, what pluralistic song might there be? You know what? I'm not gonna do a tease because that's. Well, I've already said it, so it's a little bit difficult to retract at that point, particularly because I don't edit these joints. I think of like the World Peace Prayer song. It's a little bit, to be honest, okay, maybe I will do that. I think about like a native healing song that would be appropriate, but that might be appropriate for another occasion. And the clock continues to tick. So what else we got? Well, here's what I'll share. Right. Okay, so some things again that are gleaned, that are revealed, that are shared within the past few months. I talk about patience, the foundation of all blessings within this life. I just spoke to that, so I'm gonna leave that as it is. But that's just like foundational. I talk about knowledge of self. I talk about wisdom and righteousness. Wisdom and righteousness. Wisdom is the knowledge of self, the discipline of self, and the love of self that is strengthened through our songs, stories, and rituals. And our righteousness is the actual doing of that wisdom. That's a little bit of a combobbled articulation of that, but that's the gist of it. Focusing on our songs, stories, and rituals that connect us with our ancestors, inform us of who we are, the divine spirit that exists within us, affirmational of that, emphasizing our relationships with our parents, with our siblings, with our spouses, with our brethren, with our teachers, with the earth and all beings and all life and all phenomenon of the universe. That's the wisdom, and how it's strengthened through those means, songs, stories, and rituals, and strengthening our sense of self, like how our self-esteem, our confidence, our swag, and everything else, from those stories that affirmational. So much of what we, I was thinking about this actually earlier this evening, is that I remember like growing up, certain TV shows coming on at a certain hour, and thinking like, looking forward so much to seeing those television shows, and thinking of how much my sense of self was tied into watching those television shows. However, in actuality, those television shows were like junk food to the mind. A lot of special effects, pretty people, maybe some clever lines here and there, occasionally, fantastic story plots and stuff like that. But in terms of like telling me about who I am, what I'm supposed to be doing in this life, didn't tell me too much about that. Anyways, so I think to myself just again this evening, like how much I would look forward to a certain hour of the week, just because that would be when the show was coming on. And I've seen some shows from back when I was younger, in my young adulthood days, my young manhood days, even teenage days. And I was watching this, and I was like, wait a minute, that's like racist. That's like intolerably racist. Like I couldn't. I remember my mentality when I would first see it of just like, Oh well, you have to understand it in context, and it's well-meaning, and it's beneficial for what can be expected. All those kind of like explanations and this and the other, but that I do not accept today. But I intrinsically make myself. I say that to myself in my watching that, and in my like. I remember thinking of that, like that being the explanation of what allows me to laugh at the jokes. But they were like, wait a minute, that's kind of like, nah, I know what that's saying, and I know what that's thinking, and that's messed up. So it's almost like somewhat trepidatious to like look back at all the stuff that I used to watch as a youngster, because seeing it for what it actually is when I have the knowledge that I have today, um, and then considering what youngsters are watching these days. Um, anyway, so the point is that those songs, those stories, those rituals are less affirmational, less conducive and facilitating of a knowledge of self, a discipline of self, or a love of self. It's increasingly predicated upon a love of others, an emulation of others, and a clinging on to the proximity with others. So, and others are beautiful in their own right, but there are things even for others that are increasingly healthy and self affirmational. So that's the consideration is finding those stories, finding those songs, finding those rituals, and adhering to that. So anyway, that's wisdom. Righteousness is just doing it, yo. Serious. Stop. Minimize the harm that we cause others. Minimize the harm we cause to ourselves. Minimize the harm that we cause towards life, the nature, animals, plants. People talk about like the miracles of science, and I myself say like for the past 2 centuries, like science has been the miracle workers of humanity. Those who the community that's been awing humanity has been science. When you look at all the different things science has done, communication, transportation, weaponry, and additionally, science has kind of got people in the pocket along those lines. Um, Doctors, and additionally, although it's difficult to attribute much miracles to doctors specifically, that's another story. But here's the flip side to that, though. If scientists are going to take the credit for those discoveries and those miracles of science, then there's also the flip side. When we look at pollution, when we look at waste in the oceans, plastic containers and wrappings and bags that are choking the sea life, and we just attribute it to like the mass production of greedy economic methodologies. That's science. That's science. It's not. It's yes, corporations and indifference in people and everything else, but it's also a byproduct of the methodologies of production, the indifference, and additionally of science. And so again, if science is going to take credit for all the big things, then there's also taking responsibility, owning up to the nasty stuff, and that also includes disease and other afflictions that are caused through. And I'm particularly thinking of things like cancer, and additionally that are caused through experimentation with chemistry and exposure to individuals who suffer adversely because of that experimentation, directly, indirectly, and otherwise. So again, that's the responsibility of science. I mean, it's everybody's responsibility. It's my responsibility and everybody else's too. But anyways, my point for all that. Hee haw. Talking about miracles. Talking about righteousness, discipline. Well, I'm going to finish on that mini tirade, to just also include that, again, science is responsible for severe atrocities like nuclear warfare, atomic bomb, and additionally, the people who are killed through those means, the threats, the power plays, and everything else that's facilitated through that weaponry, that science too. So there's a balance within that, and amidst all that, amidst that recognition, whatever, the consideration is a discipline, cultivating a discipline, and how much in the science and the technology that we as a collective of Earth pursue. Being able to appropriately identify priority technology, and to invest in priority technology accordingly, and to other forms of technology that are other than priority, that particularly those that lead to considerable amounts of pollution, and additionally divesting from that. So it's not a matter of saying all technology is bad, all science is bad. No, that's not it. There's legitimacy within science. There's truth within science. There's legitimacy within technology. There's truth within technology. That's a continual process of human experience in Earth civilization. There's always that looking for another way of doing things, a further efficient way of doing things, a further productive way of doing things. There's always competition of people vying along those different technologies. But we are reaching a stage where we need to be increasingly selective and judicious, because there are many inefficient and unproductive methodologies and pursuits of technology and employments of technology that are increasingly detrimental, and that are rationalized and subsidized and otherwise because of different balances of influence, pretenses of propriety, and holding on to effective experiences of obsolescence, just as a way of holding on in general. So anyway, discipline is, I guess, where I'm going with that. Now, this isn't even getting to the point where I say, wait, this joint wasn't long enough. It's 2 hours long. It wasn't long enough. So now I'm recording a long. I guess it is a concluding thing, so I'll just share what I have. So I'm going to continue on. See, the narrative was actually further succinct and linear than what I'm sharing now, because I'm sharing ideas. And it's also a little bit of a potpourri kind of approach as well. So, discipline. I share the discipline, the fivefold, the singlefold discipline: honesty, sobriety, veganism, marital fidelity, and ethical economics. There is the idea, the paradigm, the approach, the discipline of non-predatoriness. And I mentioned before on numerous occasions how there being a middle ground. We look at the pachyderms. And after a conversation with a brother a number of weeks ago, who challenges me on that about lions not hunting elephants, we had a rather contentious kind of thing where family members get insulted. But amidst the dust clearing, what occurs to me, what is shared with me afterwards, is the accuracy of, like, it's difficult to categorically say that lions do not hunt elephants, because lions hunt anything lions want to hunt. That's less of the that's less, the accuracy is less on that kind of notion of what the lions do, and that's actually not the point. That's not the point of the joint. The point of the joint is that, guess what? Elephants fight back. And other animals fight back. Hippopotami fight back. Even giraffi fight back. And it's further difficult to disprove that because that's actuality. So regardless of what the lions hunt, we have little control, effectively, directly, honestly, about what lions hunt. Lions hunt lions. Lions hunt people. Lions hunt whatever lions want. But the fact is that they're animals that fight back, and there are herbivores that fight back: elephants, hippopotami, giraffe, and additionally. So there are hippopotami that fight back crocodiles, and additionally, when crocodiles feel so bold as to take on the hippopotami. So that's the point, is that there's a middle ground of not being predator and not being prey. And so the consideration is for those who are so inclined to strengthen that resolve. And that discipline, that fivefold discipline of honesty, sobriety, veganism, marital fidelity, and ethical economics, is one way that I learned to strengthen that resolve. And I ain't invincible. It ain't like some kind of cure-all thing forever or whatever. But first of all, it's not me. I didn't make it up. It's ancient. It's from the different traditions. You can look at the Torah. You can look at the Quran. You can look at the Digha Nikaya. You can look at the Patanjali Yamas. You can look at you can even look at the Tao Te Ching. In the first book, or in the first chapter, of just recognizing what desire is, and how those five disciplines are a way of disciplining desire, and particularly the negative, the tendency of negative consequences from the experience of desire. So you can look at the Gospels, that where Jesus quotes the Torah. But those elements are there. Those five disciplines, those single disciplines are there. And because of that, because it's in all these different traditions, and because it's like a very simple, pragmatic rubric of behavior, it's a strong foundation for navigating the confluences of human civilizations, cultures, religiosities, and additionally, and it's a strong foundation of pluralism. And so you ain't got to take my word for it. I have bias just as everybody else does, but that's what I share. And I'm building up to I guess what I'm sharing as a kicker. I'll share this, and then I'll sing the little. Don't mean to be pejorative on that. I'll share the refrain from the chorus from the World Peace Prayer song, and that might be a wrap for this joint. Anything else before I get to that sequence? Midnight Scratches. The werewolf is about. So, a needle pulling thread. Anything else that I share? Yeah, that's much of where we're at this point. So, I may not. Well, yeah, all right. Here we go. So, I am sharing the kicker. I'm sharing the song. And then that's the wrap. Okay. So the kicker actually has two parts. The first part is this affirmation. I've shared it before. Our destination is heaven. Our origin is heaven. Our path is our decision. Some may hear that and say, yeah, whatever. Some may say, how do you know? Where's your proof? Some may say, yeah, I like to believe that, but I don't want to think that somebody else is gonna get what I'm gonna get, this and the other. So for the yeah, whatevers, sure, okay. For those who say, where's your proof? Okay, hear you. For those that say, yeah, but nah, not that dude, not that one over there. I'm uninterested in arguing. It's ultimately a matter of faith, much like sitting in a chair. Um, that's actually funny. Um, but I will share this as kind of like to give context and give some kind of tangibility and some like grist to hold on to make it increasingly um, perceivable, plausible. Now, this is a belief: everybody goes to heaven. Everybody goes to heaven. However, we all go through hell before, at some point in life, we go through hell before we get to heaven. And in this life, we pay for everything that we do, we pay for everything that we say, we pay for everything that we think before we return to heaven. So there is karma, there is justice, there is the day of judgment, there is a reckoning. Everybody goes through that before re-entering to heaven. And for the hardcore religionists, the Orthodox that challenge me about that, according to religious teaching, consideration is how, in the times of our respective prophets, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Moshe Rabbeinu, Jesus, and additionally, simply recognizing that there are certain things cats couldn't handle at that point, and how rife that actuality is throughout the scriptures of each of those traditions specifically. We can talk about Eastern traditions as well, but I think there's less skepticism about my proclamation. It's increasingly a matter of reconciling the notion of transmigration, but I intend to address that in a minute, as if I can like just sum up all religiosity in the next 5 minutes or whatever. But when it comes to Abrahamic scriptures, how often do each of the prophets say, okay, yeah, they're not ready for this, in different ways. And so what I share is exactly congruent with what is taught in the Torah, in the Quran, in the Gospels. It's a matter of understanding it in a certain way, in a proficient way. That's a little bit, I don't mean it in that way. In a fuller way, or in a further way, perhaps. And that's not to be like condescending or like having a better understanding or anything. But the actual like intentionality is to emphasize further, meaning that heaven exists beyond our articulation of it, and thus it exists beyond our description of it. And so the actuality of heaven, like the infinity, the ultimate reality of heaven, exists beyond perception. And the descriptions that are provided by our respective prophets are genuine and truthful, but it's also other than the encapsulation. So that's and I say that with a very moderate command of the teachings within each of the scriptures I referenced here. So cats can call me out and challenge me about further detailed teachings, and additionally, but the actuality, the truth of what I share holds, it stays, it stands. And I'm very amenable to having that conversation. But like I say, everybody, we pay for everything that we do in this life. There is that balance. And from that, there is procession into the ultimate reality, returning into the ultimate reality, uniting with God, Allah, Hashem, Brahman, Nirvana, and returning to our true ultimate self. That's our destination. That may provide some people peace, that might provide some people frustration. I shared it as it is. Now, again, the other component of that is that our origin is heaven. We all come from heaven. amidst all the narratives of creation, amidst all the narrative of lineages and heritage, ultimately we each come exactly directly from heaven. And with that recognition, that levels the playing field on this earth. There's still distinctions, there's still differences of labor and caste and everything, but the implications of those differences is increasingly contextualized and even effectively minimalized, marginalized, with the recognition of each one coming from heaven. Now that's where Eastern traditions say, well, past lives, karma, reincarnation, consequences of previous deeds done previously, and additionally, that also is a limited approach or recognition of the ultimate reality in addition. And for me to explain the origin of heaven, like our origin from heaven, is going to take a little bit longer, and particularly as the congruency with the teaching of transmigration and reincarnation. The consideration is that like the brief explanation or the brief articulation is simply, we each come from God directly, and when we are conceived in this life respectively, that is when our temporality is contextualized. But before that point, we are exactly everything of the universe. So when we talk about past lives and everything, we are everything that existed before we emerge into this life, into this temporal realm. And so in actuality, it's not a matter of having a past life, it's a matter of being all past lives, because that's where we come from. And we are manifested in this universe in a temporal context. So anyways, that's a consideration of that. But again, the purpose for me sharing that is balance, is a certain amount of reassurance, of affirmation, particularly amidst all the shibboleth and the subordination and subjugation, the false subjugation additionally that's done in this earthly realm. When we recognize our origin and the legitimacy within us from that origin, there's an increasing amount of resilience against or amidst the undue approaches and aggressions of others, the attempts of dehumanizing and rationalizing hostilities based upon one's accused inauthenticity or inferiority or whatever else. We all come from heaven, and there's intrinsic equality that exists within that, that we all also know, but it's difficult for many to readily and continually acknowledge. So we all come from heaven. Our path is our decision. The third element of that is a matter of recognizing that in this life, recognizing that balance, we have a decision, we have a choice on how we proceed, and then that shapes our continuing path. So we can blame others for what we experience, the suffering, the dukkha that we experience. When we blame others, we give others power. If we blame ourselves, then we give ourselves power. But it's less reassuring, it's less comforting when we blame ourselves, because that means we have to change something within ourselves if we want to experience something different. And that can be difficult. So, but that's our decision, and we live with the consequences accordingly. So that's much of the consideration. The one other thing on this first part is that with the knowledge of the balance of our destination being heaven and our origin being heaven, it provides us an additional amount of calm, serenity, security, self-esteem to make decisions that are increasingly healthy, and supportive of who we are and supportive of those around us, the health and well-being of those around us. So that's again one of the purposefulness of the proclamation of our destination being heaven and our origin being heaven. So that's that. Now this second part, numero dos, I'll give another etymological explanation of a word, and then kind of just sum it up with that joint, from that joint. So in the English language, I share with many people, including recently, the contention that the most powerful word in the English language is forgiveness. And if we look at, well, first to perceive that appropriately, it's a matter of recognizing that love is the greatest power. First of all, regardless of what the language is, love is the greatest power, and it can be considered, discussed, recognized that one, at least, of the greatest forms or expressions of love is forgiveness, particularly because it is only after we are betrayed, we are afflicted, we experience suffering, that we can forgive someone else. Forgiveness is an act of love, and it's one of the highest and greatest acts of love. So there's that part of it. But then further, to look at the etymology of the word forgiveness. For means the utmost, the greatest, the highest. To give means to offer of oneself, to provide from oneself. And ness means the abode of. So forgiveness is the abode of the greatest offering of oneself. The most powerful word in the English language. And yes, I think about God and additionally, but I also think of how these words, these terms, I'm not saying forgiveness is greater than God per se. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the word in English and how the words are utilized in English. Accordingly, I share the consideration of forgiveness being the most powerful word in the English language. So, with that said, here's the kicker. Here's the second part. Here's the dosium shows that I share, and it's simply this: heaven is a sovereignty built on forgiveness. And with that, I share the song. It is the refrain from the World Peace Prayer song. Here it is. Salam Shalom Wolokota Shanti Ewa Mir Paz Wa Benamani. Salam Shalom Wolokota Shanti Ewa Mir Paz Wa Benamani. May peace prevail upon earth. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom. Mir, zaijin, adios, TzuriJi, esabina asamugo, kila ufred. One love and peace, happiness and liberation.